recording. Hello, y'all. Welcome to our Unit 2 session. It's good to see everybody. So this is our Unit 2 live session. What we'll be doing today is continuing our conversation about this class. I'm going to try to set up a little bit about what critical thinking is, talk about some of the I would say larger goals of this class might be a way of thinking about this. Particularly the word of the day is going to be intellectual honesty. I guess technically that's a phrase. So the phrase of today is going to be intellectual honesty. So I've just shared our Blackboard page with us, all of us, so we could take a look at it. I'm just going to take a little bit of a stroll through the Blackboard page just to give us an overview and a lay of the land as to what's happening in our unit this week. I'm going to first go to course content, then to the Unit 2 folder, because that's what unit it is right now, intellectual honesty. Let's do some scrolling around. Here's some of the stuff we're learning in class today: intellectual honesty, the principle of charity, Steel-Manning argument, all that sort of stuff. Do a little bit more scrolling down. Here's the Unit 2 live session. Y'all are in it right now. Good job for all of you who are here currently. Here are the slides we'll be using in the most of our live session today. I also, maybe you haven't seen this yet, but we're recording all of these live sessions. I will always put the recording YouTube link right here underneath of this. So I'll do a quick survey of Unit 1 last week's, so you can see that's what I did. I put the recording of the Unit 1 live session right here. Here's our YouTube link. I'll click on it just to prove it. There it is. This is our live session. Whoop. All right. Now going back. All right. Here's our only reading for class. I mentioned this in our announcement yesterday, or yeah, it was yesterday. These are some excerpts from an article called Intellectual Humility, the Importance of Knowing You Might Be Wrong. We will be discussing this a little bit in the second part of today's live session. So be sure to read that if you haven't already. And then there's an optional resource. Remember, everything that's under the readings heading in any unit folder is required reading. So this is what's required this week. And then anything under the resources is optional reading. So if you want to read a little bit about a rational life plan, you can go ahead and take a look at this 3-page article about rational life plans. Cool. So now we'll talk about assignments for this week. There are 2 assignments for this week. There's a unit discussion question, and there is a participation activity. Those are the 2 big things. The discussion question you're already somewhat familiar with. You had a Unit 1 discussion question, the same basic thing with the same basic deadlines, Saturday and Wednesday deadlines. Your initial post in this discussion board is due by the end of the day Saturday, and that's where I want you to answer all of the questions on this particular prompt. And then by Wednesday of next week, the September 16th, your 2 replies are due. You'll be replying to other students in that discussion board and what they've written. So this particular week, we'll be learning about intellectual honesty and intellectual dishonesty. I want you to, in their discussion board, describe a time, a real, actual time in your life when you or someone you know acted intellectually dishonestly. We'll be talking more about what intellectual dishonesty is during class today, during this live session. So don't worry about trying to think about it now, but try to describe a time when you or someone else was attempting to manipulate or trick somebody using argumentative techniques that you or they knew weren't aimed at ominously figuring out the truth. So you'll just be describing that situation a little bit. So candidly, we have our cameras on. That is 100% up to you. You have the option of keeping your cameras on. You don't have to keep your cameras on if you don't want to. A general good rule of thumb is to keep your audio muted no matter what you do. only unmuted in the cases where you want to like speak up and say something. That's mainly so you just don't have a lot of background noise going on. If you want the camera on, you can have it on. If you don't want to have your camera on, you don't have to have it on. It is, by the way, just as a side note for all of you, it's nice to see your faces sometimes. Not just sometimes, and all the time. So I get excited when I get to see some of your faces. But again, it's totally up to you whether you want to put your camera on or not. Continuing on with the discussion of this, with an explanation of this discussion question, how do you describe a time in your life when you or somebody else was intellectually dishonest? Describe that person could have done instead to mean intellectual honesty. If that person cared about being intellectually honest, cared about the truth above all else, how would that person, either you or that other person you're describing, how would that person have argued differently? What would they have done differently instead? So again, first post due Saturday, 2 replies due Wednesday. One added wrinkle I want to mention about this yet again, I mentioned this briefly during the live session last week. You have 3 total posts to do in this discussion board. You're expected, and there's a little right here explanation of this, you're expected to post on 3 different days in your discussion forums every week. So since you got 3 posts, just try to spread them out over 3 different days. Your initial post due Saturday, maybe you want to get a little bit ahead of that. Maybe you post your first initial post today. So there's your first post on a Friday. Then maybe you wait until Sunday for your first of 2 replies. And you come back to the discussion board on Sunday, look at what people have written, and then reply to 1 other person on Sunday. And then maybe you come back on Tuesday and you write your second reply, your 3rd total post, when you look back at the discussion board yet again. The main idea is you're not just supposed to, in this discussion board, pop in the discussion forum once, write all your stuff, and peace out. You want to think of this as an ongoing conversation throughout the entire week, so that you check into the discussion forum periodically throughout each week of that unit. All right, so that's everything in relation to the discussion board that I wanted to talk about and mention. Any questions, thoughts, or concerns about that, feel free to post in the chat. Feel free to hit that raise hand button if you want, and I will see it and I can call on you. Feel free to just unmute yourself. There are few enough of us here, and just say what's on your mind. All of that's acceptable. But for now, we'll move on to the second thing. The other graded thing this week is called a participation activity. This participation activity is on a rational life plan. So one of the things I'm going to try to be doing in class today is setting up this course in general. I'm trying to start to pay off, strong a word, start to try to pay off the bold claim from last week that this is the most important class you're ever going to take. I'm going to try to think about tying critical thinking skills to actual things that matter in your life a lot more than you might have done that in other classes that emphasized critical thinking. And one way to try to very directly tie critical thinking skills to your everyday life is to write up what's called a rational life plan. I mentioned that optional resource down here is a 3-page article on what a rational life plan is. So you can take a look at this if you want more explanation of what counts as a rational life plan. But the gist of a rational life plan is it's a list of things that matter to you at the very top before you set forward your plan. Things that might matter to you is like your family or just self-improvement in general or being creative. Maybe it's more specific things that you value like your grades. Maybe it's more general things like your health. Is anything that matters to you? And then next to each one of those things you value, I want you to provide a really short explanation of why each of these things matter to you. I'm talking about like a 1 or 2 sentence explanation. Why does this matter to you? And then here's where we're starting to set forward the plan. I want you to write up a list of goals that you'd like to accomplish in your future. You're going to start planning for your future and really try to tie them explicitly to each of these values. You might say, because I value creativity, I want to set forward a goal of writing a novel or something like that. Because I value my family, I want to set forward a goal of spending a lot of time with my family, something along the lines of that. Because I value self-improvement, I want to try to take up a new skill every year of my life, something like that. And here's where it starts to become a little bit planny. We want to try to turn this into a hierarchy where you put your goals in order from most important to least important. Maybe health is your top goal, or maybe creativity is your top goal. Whatever you had at the top. And what's your second most important goal? And what's your third most important goal, etc. And then here's where we get super, super planned out. What are the set of specific plans and sub-plans on how and when you'd like to accomplish these goals, how you could go about doing this. All of this is work in progress. This can always change throughout your life. Janae asks in the chat, is there an example on how you want this to be written? There isn't really an example, no. You can click on this to sort of read a little bit more of an explanation, but I don't really want to get you worried too much about the format. A little bit of a reminder about how I grade these participation activities. As long as you complete the assignment and hand it in on time, you're getting full credit, all 25 points out of a possible 25 points for doing it. So if your format happens to be a little off, I'm not going to judge it. I'm not going to grade it worse. This is just an exercise that's for you. And your rational life plan is really for your own benefit. It's your life plan. It's not my life plan. So however it is you want to create it that makes sense to you is how I want you to do it. So to that end, that's why I'm not going to be providing you with an example on exactly how I want this formatted or how I want this written. But going back to this final bullet point here, the specific plans and subplans I think are really important. So when you say, like, I value my family, I want to spend time with my family, one thing you can do is try to set forward specific plans. You can say, well, there are certain holidays where we already get together, but if I want to spend time with these specific family members that I don't see that often outside of those holidays, what could I begin to do today to really prioritize that? Maybe one thing I want to do is set up one weekend a month where I visit my family. Or maybe I want to set up like a weekly game night with my family. Or maybe I want to set up consistent phone calls with my aunt and uncle to make sure that I'm still interacting with my family, even though they're all the way across the country and I can't visit them that often. Something along the lines of that are setting up specific plans and subplans. Same thing for like self-improvement or creativity. If you say you want to write a novel and that's your goal, well, how do you start doing that? Well, maybe you do something like setting yourself page goals where you say, I'd like to try to write maybe like 1 page every day over the course of the next month, so that by the end of this month I have 30 pages of my novel written. And then the month after that, maybe I set a slightly higher page goal. I try to write 2 pages a day so that I have 60 pages by the end of that second month for a total of 90 pages, something along the lines of that. Try to be specific. Trying to organize this is a helpful way to try to think through this rational life plan. So that's it. I mentioned the grading part about this. All I want you to do is try to do this. For many of you, it might be your first time creating a rational life plan. It's not about how perfect it looks. It's just designed to be a tool that can get you to start thinking about your future and what you can start doing to help actively constructing the sort of future you want to have for yourself. As always, our deadlines in this class are Wednesday deadlines for discussion questions. There's always a Saturday deadline for the initial post, but then 2 replies due by Wednesday. Everything else is always due by Wednesday. Questions, thoughts, or concerns about the participation activity? If you have those questions, feel free to post them in the chat, just like Shanae did. If you have the question, you can also raise your hand and I'll call on you. You can unmute yourself. Any thoughts or concerns, feel free to let me know. All right, so to sort of split up class today, we're going to be talking about a group project as well, but I'm going to hold off to talk about that until like the midway part of our live session, just as a helpful indicator that separates like the halfway point of today's live session. So I promise we'll be talking about this group project as well. Just a little foreshadowing, this group project is not something that's due this unit. All we're going to be doing today is figuring out which students are in which groups for the group project that's going to wind up being due toward the end of the semester around December 6th. So don't worry about that for now. Maybe about 30 minutes to an hour, we'll come back and talk about that. Cool. So let's go back to what we were discussing last week in our first unit live session. We came up with all of these reasons why all of y'all think this is not going to be the most important class you've ever taken. So I made that obnoxiously bold claim that I think this is the most important class you'll ever take. And I think a bunch of you did a very nice job of brainstorming, really thinking through why it is you think this is not going to be the most important class. So many of you, first and foremost, just listed all these other skills that are at least as important as critical thinking skills, or perhaps even more important. So that's like communication skills, or listening skills, or English skills, or just social skills, basic survival skills, mathematics. All of these sorts of skills are things that you could argue are more important than critical thinking skills. Then there was a cluster of responses that focused on the subjectivity of the phrase most important and the subjectivity of the phrase critical thinking. So our second response here is that critical thinking means different things to different people. For some people, how they understand critical thinking might be really valuable. For others, it might be something that's inessential, that's not that significant at all. And the same thing with what qualifies as important to you. So many of you have vastly different goals. Just think about all the different majors y'all were saying you are during our introductions last week. So for each one of you, you might really value some other particular class because of your goals, right? If you're a sociology major, maybe a sociology class is more in keeping with your goals. If you're an English major, maybe some English classes are more in keeping with your goal. If you're a forensic psychology major, maybe forensic psychology classes are more important to you. I feel like the more I say the word important, the more I feel like I'm saying it wrong. I don't know what that is, but now I'm suddenly self-conscious about how I say the word important. Sorry about that. But the more I say it, the more I'm going to feel like I'm saying it weird, and I'm going to try to adjust it, and me adjusting it's going to make it sound even weirder. So let me just try this a few times. Important, 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 important. Sorry. All right, anyway. So another type of response we heard is that there might just be other things that are more important in life in general, like mental health. I don't know that we came up with an exhaustive list of other things that might be more valuable aside from critical thinking, but there might be some sort of conflict between critical thinking and the skills needed to become effective at critical thinking and some of the other things of value in our life, such as mental health or happiness, maybe, I don't know, love, stable relationships, I don't know. Sort of things that toward the end we were talking about is just that it feels unreasonable to say that this class is more important than others because this is just something you've heard before. Pretty much every teacher values their own class that they teach. It's a classic teacher bias. And all of the teachers will tell you how valuable the skills are that you're developing. So by this point in your education, you've probably become a little bit, I don't know, blasé about this. You become a little skeptical and suspicious of the sorts of claims that this is a super important class. And it's not clear how necessary this particular specific class is, in particular because critical thinking is the sort of thing that's parts of lots and lots of classes. So I really like all of what you're doing. I wanted to just remind ourselves of all of this. And now this gets me to, if I can switch back over to last week's discussion board. When I was looking through in your Unit 1 discussion, the question about how much you believe what it is I was saying, a lot of you were, I asked you to come up with a particular percentage between like 0% and 100% as to how much you predict you'll wind up agreeing with me by the end of the semester. I wound up seeing like some pretty high numbers throughout all of this. So if I could just sort of scroll through to this, I saw somewhere around 90% for some of us, 70% for bunches of us, about 67%. If I could scroll down to some of the more skeptical people at the bottom, where are some of my skeptical people? Got an 80%, that's still kind of high. I feel like one of the lower ones I saw, if I can find it. Oh, that's a super high one. Another 98%, 90%. I feel like the lowest one I saw was somewhere around 10-15%. Got a 70%. Where are my skeptics? 60%, 50%, about 50% again. Here's a lowish one, 25%, about 50%, 35%, finally getting below 50% somewhat consistently down here, 80%. So I'm only going through all of this because I wanted to just like think about this question about what percentage is as itself a critical thinking problem. So I want to just sort of set forward following sort of question. So what percent chance is there that this will be your, I'll just summarize it as best class. Your most important class, but I wanted to make sure it fit all in one line. And so one thing we might want to do at the very start is ask a more basic question. What chance does any one of your classes have at being the best? Just any single one. And to really figure that out, what you have to do is figure out what's called the base, to figure out then your base rate. So the base is how many classes you've taken in total. So let's try to figure this out. How many classes do you think you've taken as a student throughout your life so far? Feel free to write in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand and start throwing out estimates. How much do you think you can do this? Did that just go away? So I also just realized something that I did. I forgot to switch back. I was starting to write here toward the bottom of this, and I didn't switch back to that. Sorry, y'all. What percent chance do you think that this will be one of your best classes? What chance does any one of your classes have at being the best? Well, let's figure out the base rate. Right now, what we're trying to figure out is this. How many classes in total do you think you've taken throughout your life? So to do this, we're going to have to figure out like how many classes you took from like kindergarten through 8th grade. And then we'll have to figure out like how many classes have you taken in high school? And then this is going to vary for each of you. You might want to figure out how many classes you've taken so far in your college career. So let's try to figure out each one of these numbers. How many classes did you wind up taking? Let's go with high school first, because that might be in lots of your recent memories. Each year you go to high school, about how many classes do you take? Robert says 9, Franco says 17, Shantae's going with 8, Olivia's going with 9, Amanda's going with about 12. We got some more 8, 9, some 7 or 8. Scratch that, 10. I'm going to be a little bit lazy here because we're doing what people refer to as back of the envelope calculations. Sometimes it's just helpful to be lazy and like round. So what if we go with like about 10 classes a year, something like that. And this is obviously going to vary from high school to high school, right? Some of you might only have about 7. Franco has a big one, 17 different classes in any given year. And then I like 10 if you included lunch. Does lunch count as a class? I definitely used to have study hall. I don't know if study hall counted as a class. And Lamar said 32 total throughout high school. Remember study hall? But I'm going to be lazy. I think I had about 8 classes a year, but I'm gonna go with 10 just to make the math easy. So that's going to be 40 total. Let's say it's about 40 total, or maybe between 30 and 40, something like that. Might be higher for some of you, might be slightly lower. Now, I think from kindergarten to 8th grade, you might have had fewer classes. Y'all remember in study hall now? So like in kindergarten, like what I remember about kindergarten is I just had basically one class the whole time, right? It was the same teacher. And like, I guess we learned different stuff, but I would consider that all like one class. Also in kindergarten, like I only went to school half of the day. I think I was a morning kindergarten kid, so it was like 9 to noon, and then I would just go home for lunch. But then other students had like 1 to 3 or 3 o'clock or whatever. Yeah, thinking back about how great it was. So like that would be one class. And then like it was pretty much the same until I want to say like maybe 2nd or 3rd grade, right? Like at what point did you start getting like different teachers teaching different classes? Yeah, I definitely napped on study hall, y'all. About 5th grade. For Corey, it was about 2nd grade. Isabel waited till 7th grade. Some of y'all waited till 6th, right? 4th grade. Yeah, I think it was 4th grade for me, now that I'm thinking about it, where I started to have a homeroom teacher, and then like, here's a math teacher, here's an art teacher, here's a science teacher, here's a social studies teacher. Y'all remember social studies, right? And so maybe for those first 3 years, I had like basically one class from kindergarten through 3rd grade. So that would be, for me, something like, I'm going to switch this out, kindergarten through 3rd grade. It would be, I would have just like 4 classes total because it was just a class a year. And then from maybe 4th to 8th grade, it started to change a little bit for me, right? Yeah, it was called literature instead of English. Yeah, Corey, I remember that. And then I'm sad for the people who never had study hall. Who said that? Emma never had study hall. Yeah, it was great. And then Olivia, took your study hall was taken away in high school because no one actually studied. Oh, wow. That's sad. In the 4th to 8th grade, I'd have those like 6 or 7 key classes, right? For many of us. And by the way, this is obviously going to vary if you went to school in different countries. I'm thinking a lot about basically like the United States / more specifically New Jersey type of grading system, which might explain why some of us might have very different numbers for all of this. Yeah, so apparently Franco had 7 different classes in kindergarten, which is for sure different for all of us. Yeah, recess would count as a class. Gym would count as a class. maybe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, breakfast and homework if you have that first period study hall. Yeah. Yeah, religion was a class if you went to Catholic school. Yeah, so for this one, for fourth to eighth grade, maybe it was like about 8 a year. And so that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 5 years. So that's another like 40 total. So we're up to about, what is it, 40 plus 40 plus 4. We're up to about 84. And then how many classes have you all taken in college so far? That really depends on how advanced you are in college. I know at least one of you mentioned that this is your first semester, right? Um, so I think it was Helen who was saying this is your first semester. One of the things you're learning is that college has a lot of work. It's overwhelming in a sense. So for you, you might only have like 5 other classes. But for some of you, I don't know if any of y'all are seniors in here. Oh yeah, so Isabel also mentioned the sort of wrinkle of dual credit. So you might have to add some of your high school classes, if those dual credit classes, or take them away, right? Um, but some of you might have already taken like 30 classes, right, by now. I don't know. Are any of y'all seniors in here? Anybody like almost about to graduate? All right, we got a few of y'all. Got Shanae, David, Leah, Franco. So a bunch of you have taken like probably at least 30 classes, right, by this point. Because I think all told you wind up taking about 40 classes in order to graduate. So it's often about 10 a year in college, right? 5 each semester, somewhere around there. It's not going to be exact, right? But it's something along the lines of that. So that depends. So if I add up all of this, I'm going to be lazy, and I'm going to say this is just a rough average number of classes. I think it's probably around 100 classes total. Right? So it depends on you. You might be a little bit smaller if you're a freshman, might be a little bit more if you're a senior. It might be if you're high school was a little bit different and you had more classes or fewer classes. But I'm just for being lazy about this, I'm going to make this 100 classes. So what are the chances that any one of your classes is the best if you've had 100 classes? I'm again going to remind ourselves of this top question right down here. What are the chances that any one of your 100 classes is in fact the best? Yeah, it's a 1% chance, right? There is a 1 out of 100 classes chance, which is a 1% chance. So if this class you're in right now is no better or worse than any of your other classes, there is only a 1% chance that this is the best class. There's, in other words, a pretty damn low chance that this is the best class, just taking the base rate into account. Now, if you wanted to say something of the following sort, this class, and I'm not saying you have to say this, but let's say you want to say this class is twice as likely to be the best class as any other. You know what that means? That would mean this class has a 2% chance of being the best. Maybe you want to switch it to 3 times as likely. Then it's only a 3% chance. If you want to think this class is so good and so important, it's 10 times more likely to be the best class than any other class, that's still only a 10% chance of being the best class. That's, by the way, the lowest number that anybody in the discussion board put, around 10%. When you start getting to your numbers of like where some of you are estimating 50% or 60%, that means you're saying this class is 50 times more likely to be the best class than any other one of your classes out there. That seems like an extraordinarily high possibility, let alone the sort of people out there who were saying there's like a 98% chance, right, that this is one, in which case there'd be 98 more times more likely to be the best class. Look, maybe that's true, but just in terms of figuring out the base rate of all of this, this is an extraordinarily low probability. So all of this is to say that there's this one other thing as to why it is you might be skeptical that this isn't the most important class you've ever taken. And maybe it's a little bit similar to number 5 here, but the real big thing about all of this is just that you've taken so many classes. Just statistically, another class is probably better. Just by mere stats alone, one of these other classes is probably the better class. One of your 99 other classes you've taken in your life has a way better chance. And just think about it in general. Like, imagine you're just trying to pick a lottery winner. And you know that 100 people have played the lottery. What are the chances that that one person who's saying to you, I'm going to win the lottery, what are the chances that that one person is going to win the lottery? Would you bet on that one person being the winner, or one of those other 99 people being the winner in that lottery? The chances are overwhelmingly likely that it's going to be one of those other 99 people. And it's even the case if that one lottery person is like, hey, you know, I actually got 2 tickets. Sure, maybe they're now twice as likely as anybody else, but there's still only like a 2% chance that they're winning the lottery and a 98% chance that anybody else is winning the lottery, right? So this is one way of sort of thinking through this. And I'm doing all of this not to just be obnoxious, not to sort of shoot myself in the foot here metaphorically and say that like this definitely isn't going to be the most important class. I'm trying to offer this sort of like way you can think through this. And I wasn't trying to do this as a super hardcore math problem, but just one way of trying to frame this question in terms of some of the basic like reasoning ways that we would go about this. We want to figure out some things like the base rate when we're estimating probabilities, and really try to figure out how likely or unlikely events are in terms of a little bit of mental effort beyond just, I don't know, what number comes to my mind? What sort of rough percentage is the first percentage I sort of land on when I think through this? This all required, I don't know, what was it, 15 minutes worth of work to sort of think through that we did? And putting forward that 15 minutes of work got us to what I think is a much better range. I would say that all of you, if you had gone through this type of reasoning, would have gone under 10%. 10% would have been your highest number. 10%, remember, is giving this class a huge chance of being the best class. You're saying this class is 10 times more likely to be the best class than any of your other classes. So anyway, I don't mean to turn this into something that's demoralizing. Thoughts, reactions, comments, questions, concerns you have about any of this before we move on to something that's the more optimistic side of this quasi-pessimistic activity we just sort of went through? Any thoughts, questions, reactions you have to us trying to work through some of the basic probability of this? Just so I know you're paying attention, feel free to write nope, no thoughts, no responses in the chat if you don't have thoughts or responses to this. And as always, feel free to write your thoughts and responses if you do have them in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand if you got one. Interesting. Cool. All right, so I'm going to go back to the slides we began to look at in the first week of class. And if you remember, we really only got to the very first 2 slides last week. We went to this slide that was just a reminder about that cartoon that was the first week's assigned reading. Hopefully, more of you have read that by now. Maybe those of you who didn't read it by last Friday's live session got excited about what we were talking about and started to read it. And then we just spent a lot of the rest of class on this slide that made the claim, logic is awesome and this is the best class you're ever going to take. So now I'm going to start the process of defending this obnoxiously immodest claim. It is certainly the opposite of being humble, as this suggests here. And I'm not going to, so this isn't going to be the only week where I'm laying out this case. The only real way to make the case that this is the best class you ever take is to actually stick around for all 15 weeks and just take the course itself and actually go through every aspect of this course. So you can think of this entire 15-week course as an argument towards this conclusion, if you like. But at the very least, now is the time where we're going to start thinking through this a little bit more. So I want to talk about the word logic, because that's essentially what this critical thinking class is. This class is a logic class. And logic is a subfield of philosophy that's devoted to studying arguments in particular. And by arguments in this particular class, we mean backing up a claim with some sort of evidence. That's what we mean when we say argument in here. The word argument has tons of different meanings. We don't mean the why are mommy and daddy yelling at each other type of argument. We just mean, in this case, somebody presenting evidence in support of a claim that they believe. And this class in particular is going to be devoted to distinguishing good evidence for a claim from bad evidence for a claim. Most of what we're doing in this class is looking at evidence and trying to get better and better at figuring out what counts as good evidence and what counts as bad evidence. And one way of thinking about my bold claim from last week is that this skill, the skill of distinguishing good evidence from bad evidence, is the best life skill to develop. So if somebody was going to sincerely advocate for the position that this is the most important class you'll ever take, probably the way to do this is to say that the skill of reasoning is the most important life skill, period. It's more important than any other skill you could have. Now, I don't know if I can back that up, but that's at least the sort of bold claim that's correlated with the claim that this is the most important class. So this is called a critical thinking class. You'll often see the word logic and critical thinking used interchangeably, but here's a little dirty secret for you. I actually hate the term critical thinking. It doesn't really matter. It's not that big a deal. These are all just words, and terms can mean whatever they want. But I kind of prefer a sort of broader term called reasoning rather than the word critical thinking. When I think of critical thinking, the first thing that comes in my mind is criticism and being negative and tearing down in ways that might not be particularly productive. Whereas reasoning is at least more opening to that more positive, productive side of generating ideas and thinking through proposals and the like. So anyway, for what it's worth, I might be not using the term critical thinking that often in this class, especially since its title is critical thinking. I didn't get to choose the title. They called this class critical thinking long before I existed at Kane. This has been a class that's probably been running since at least the 70s. So anyway, there are all these other things that I associate with logic that I just want to walk through in our live session today that I think are incredibly valuable and important to your life in general. I'm talking about your life outside of a classroom. I'm talking about just in general, how you approach being a person, how you approach interacting with other people, how you approach living your life. And I know that's too grand, right? Other places I have taught a class like this, they refer to this class as the logic of everyday reasoning. I do like thinking about everyday reasoning and thinking about the everyday. So there might be something kind of like weird about this class that's at least a little bit different from your other classes, in that I want to be talking about things that actually happen in your life more often than some of your other classes. It's at least the goal. And I would love it if y'all could like keep me honest with respect to that. But I want to be talking about all of these things, these buzzwords here of trust and inquiry and true and false, learning to learn and choices. All of these sorts of things I think are wrapped up in the skill of reasoning that we'll be learning throughout this semester. So I'm going to give a little Spider-Man speech. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Spider-Man speech, it's the idea of with great power comes great responsibility. We all learned that when, spoiler alert, Uncle Ben died. Hopefully some of you aren't waiting to engage in any Spider-Man stuff and haven't realized that Uncle Ben dies toward the beginning of every Spider-Man story. But what we're doing in this class is trying to cultivate the skills of argumentation. Particularly, these skills are going to come down to understanding arguments and evaluating arguments, that evaluating arguments being distinguishing good evidence from bad evidence. And I think we can use these sorts of power for evil or for good. And I want to try to advocate using these power for good in this class. I'm going to set forward sort of an obnoxious narrative right now, a narrative of good versus evil. Maybe this is also going to turn into a Spider-Man story. And thank you for saying R.I.P. Uncle Ben, Corey. I appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit about two big things you might have heard before in other classes. Those terms are rhetoric and reasoning. So I want to talk a little bit about both of these terms right now. And for the purposes of this class, I think of rhetoric as evil and bad. They're the bad guys in our story. They're going to be the villain. Rhetoric is far and away the villain we want to try to defeat in this class. And reasoning is the hero. Reasoning is our main character and our protagonist that we want to uphold as much as possible. So I want to hear from y'all first, since probably not all of you, but at least some of you have probably heard the term rhetoric before in some of your other classes. What does the word rhetoric conjure up in your mind? When you hear the word rhetoric, what does that make you think of? If you have a full-fledged definition of rhetoric, go ahead and say that too, or again, write this in the chat. But when somebody says the word rhetoric, what are the sorts of things that that makes you think of? So yeah, you'll definitely look at that in an English class, Olivia. Shantae says it's like a persuasive way of writing or talking. Yeah, I do think the word persuasion pops up a lot when we're talking about rhetoric, for sure. Other things that y'all can think of when you hear the word rhetoric? You're using language, sure. Yeah, definitely you would learn rhetorical skills in an English class and like a language arts class. I remember when my English classes, I think somebody in the chat earlier mentioned that English class used to be called literature. English class in like 4th grade for me was called language arts. I would go to my language arts class. And that's probably where I would like learn about rhetoric for the first time, even if my teacher didn't use the word rhetoric. Yeah. So I like these responses. The way I think about rhetoric is you're trying to persuade people. And I'm putting this in the most evil light here, but think about what it means to persuade somebody. When you're persuading somebody, if I can go back a step, what you're trying to do is convince someone to believe something. Right? That's essentially what rhetoric is. That's essentially what persuasion is, right? Your goal is to try to convince someone to believe something. And when rhetoric is your goal, then you might think that that could be something that you try to do at all costs, right? Doesn't matter if you're into rhetoric, whether the thing you're trying to convince someone to believe is a good thing to believe, is somehow accurate or appropriate or effective, or name your positive adjective of choice. Persuasion is all about convincing people. And the fancy sort of like negative spin on persuasion is just manipulation. Persuasion is the art of manipulating people, tricking people into believing something. If you care about persuasion first and foremost, if you care about convincing people to believe something, at your heart, you're saying, I will go to places that tricks people. I will get people to believe something, even if it's not in their own best interest to believe it. I will try to manipulate somebody to get them to think what I want them to think. That's what being persuasive is about at its core, at least as it's different from what I refer to as the hero of our story, reasoning. Because reasoning is just trying to figure out the actual truth, trying to understand stuff. So if we go back to this definition of persuasion from earlier, we can think of reasoning as like figuring out the truth first, then trying to get others to believe it. Right? So the idea here, this is terrible formatting here, I'm sorry, but if your first and foremost goal is persuasion, you're less concerned about figuring out the truth and what's accurate or important first. Your goal is to just be persuasive. Well, reasoning is about truth first, and then maybe the convincing part, the persuasion part second, where this second part doesn't even have to be part of it. So in reasoning, we're searching for the truth. We're searching for understanding things. So in this battle of evil versus good, I think this class is uniquely situated to help you fight evil and promote the good. Side note, it's also good at getting you better at being evil, but to go back to my Spider-Man speech, I want you to use these powers for good, because you're going to be learning skills that are incredibly powerful. And with great power comes great responsibility. I'm going to be constantly advocating for using these skills for good, for truth and understanding above all else in this sort of class. All right, so let's talk about some of the specific skills we might be learning in this class. And I want to point out, we're not learning these skills today. Developing skills takes a lot of time, effort, and practice. So this is all just foreshadowing for the sorts of things we'll be learning in later units throughout the rest of the semester. But one of the first skills we'll be doing is learning how to detect evil rhetoric. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. Olivia's mentioned something in the chat, though, that I want to discuss. So Olivia said, last fall, I did a rhetorical analysis on an Edgar Allan Poe story. Is it the same thing? So when somebody does rhetorical analysis, oftentimes they're looking at the particular language and the sort of rhetorical techniques within a story or a poem or a novel or an article. Name your written thing of choice. And so why don't you describe, and this could be for anybody who's ever done a rhetorical analysis in any of your classes, what are the actual specific things that you were looking for, that you were trying to do? So Shantae mentioned these three big things that you'll see in like all rhetoric classes. You're looking for the ethos, the pathos, and the logos, right? So anybody remember what the ethos of a text is? What the pathos of a text is? What the logos of a text is? Any of that sort of stuff? Yeah, I bet, Olivia, you probably had to do something related to ethos, pathos, and logos. This is classic rhetorical analysis stuff. And by the way, what I'm saying right now, your other classes that teach rhetoric aren't going to like me for this. When I'm ultimately boiling down rhetoric to the art of tricking and manipulating others, I'm framing what it is that they're teaching you, what it is that you learn as rhetoric, in a very bad negative light of the sort that others. So just take all this with a grain of salt. Remember, anything I say, you don't have to believe in this class. I'm purposely making a very one-sided case right now. I'm going to be a lot more balanced, a lot less black and white, good versus evil throughout the rest of this semester, but I'm being purposely inflammatory in these first 2 units of the course, just to try to, like, I don't know, gain your attention a little bit. So Lamar says you're ultimately trying to find certain concepts or truths within the writing. And Shante breaks down each of these 3 things. Ethos is like the ethics, logos, the logic, and pathos is the emotional pull. So this is a really good way of sort of getting down to this. Ethos and pathos are 2 of the rhetorical types of moves that are distinct from this sort of reasoning. And this logos part is like this class, logos and logic being the study of arguments. But when put within the context of pathos and an emotional pull, and ethos like this ethical pull, logos might be put towards some sort of different purpose. Essentially, when you're doing rhetorical analysis, you're trying to look at the techniques and skills that an author uses to be, in some vague sense, persuasive or convincing, right? There might be something that an author does that pulls on you emotionally. That's the pathos that they use to try to convince you that what they're writing about is worth reading, that what they're writing about is of value in some sort of way. And so that pathos is trying to appeal to your emotions in some sort of way. Similar with other sorts of rhetorical techniques. There might be some type of language that an author uses that tries to connect you, the reader, to them, the author, in some sort of way that is trying to say, hey, we're part of the same group. We're part of the same community. We share the same basic ethic in some sort of way. You and I, we're not so different after all, type of move. And that sort of rhetorical technique is also, again, about being, in some vague sense, convincing. In some vague sense, trying to provide this sort of connection. Now, one thing I do want to say in sort of a broad defense of rhetoric, oftentimes when other classes are talking about rhetoric, they're talking about rhetoric outside of the context of providing an argument. And remember, this class is all about arguments. The big word in this class is we're understanding and evaluating arguments. A reminder of what an argument is: it's evidence for a claim. We're looking a lot at good evidence versus bad evidence, just as a reminder. But in the context of arguments, rhetoric I think of as the destruction of arguments. It's the use of arguments towards some sort of ulterior motive. And again, I'm stating this now, I'm not arguing for it yet, but this is one of the sort of larger lessons I want us to take from this class. When you're doing an Edgar Allan Poe story the way Olivia did, Edgar Allan Poe is probably not explicitly trying to make an argument in his story. He might be trying to be persuasive in some sort of way, but it might be towards the goal of art, of creating some sort of artistic achievement that's of aesthetic value. And within that sort of context, rhetoric might be more acceptable. Um, and as Olivia mentions, lots of times within stories, messages are more hidden and have to be unpacked. Messages also might be sort of multiple, pluralistic in that sort of way. So sure. But in the context of this class, where we care about arguments, there are people that will be using arguments all around you in a very evil way. I just want you to think about all the people in the world who are out there trying to trick you and trying to manipulate you. Anyone think of examples? I mean, I just put some like examples of books on this. But what are things in the world that are out there just trying to persuade you all the time? What are some people, some things out there that are just about tricking, that are just about manipulating? Ooh, so Monique says politics. Interesting. Yeah, right? Think about what a politician is often trying to do. At least a politician who is trying to win an election, right? A politician is trying to get you to vote for them. That politician is trying to do what it takes to persuade you to vote specifically for them. Lamar says billboards, right? Commercials, propaganda, media, sales and marketing. Think about how much advertising on giant billboards, on TV commercials, in pop-up ads exists. That is just a never-ending stream of efforts to trick and manipulate you, of efforts to get you to buy the latest Travis Scott extra value meal at McDonald's or whatever. That's just a world full of people just trying to persuade you to do something. And for what it's worth, there's a whole team of scientific research out there entirely about this. Anybody who studied consumer psychology in here might know that what consumer psychology is amounts to the science of how consumers think. Studying scientifically how consumers think and make their choices, oftentimes so that companies can then do a better job at getting consumers to spend more money and buy more stuff. Every store you have been in your life has been influenced by scientific research about where the company should put various things in the store so that you're more likely to buy that stuff. In particular, you're more likely to buy stuff that you'll regret later, that you'll be like, why did I buy that? I didn't need to buy that. And think about all the times that's happened to you in your life, where you've like done one of those. They're all the terms that you're probably familiar with these. Made those impulse purchases when you're in the checkout line at a particular store, when you're just sitting there slightly bored for 30 seconds waiting to check out, and you're just like, oh wow, I'll buy some lip balm. Cool. All right, I'll buy a couple packs of gum. Okay. That sort of stuff. Consumer psychology is a field devoted to this. This is not just one person who's trying to trick you. This isn't your weirdo uncle who's trying to trick you because your weirdo uncle's always pulling off some sort of weird multi-level marketing scheme or whatever. I'm talking about hundreds upon thousands of scientific researchers whose job it is to figure out how your mind works and how to best manipulate it to buy stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Candy and gum at registers, right, Corey? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's one part of it. And then think about books like this, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Think about that. That is by a well-known, successful, from the last turn of the century, capitalist named Dale Carnegie, who made a ton of money and wrote one of these best-selling self-help books about winning friends, influencing people. Influencing people is a fancy word for tricking people, manipulating people, getting people to do what you want them to do. This book is held up as one of the most important books in all of the business world. If this particular one successful business person is so successful, well, we want to try to use and mimic his techniques and do what he does. And there's a whole world of business people like this as well. Yeah, social engineering is a good way of putting this. And again, well, I don't know that I've said this before, but I'm not trying to denigrate anybody who works in advertising or who works in sales. I'm not trying to denigrate anybody who owns a business here. I'm trying to point out that there are lots and lots of entities out there in the world that put as their primary goal influencing you, persuading you, at the core tricking and manipulating you. And figuring out what's actually good for you, what the truth is, what is a better way of understanding the world, is just secondary. Or, at worst, not even a priority for those other entities out there. So one of the things we're going to be doing here in this class is learning how to better notice when others use these tricky rhetorical skills, these rhetorical arguments to try to manipulate us. We're going to try to get really good at noticing, wait, that's just a rhetorical technique. There's no actual good evidence behind what that person's saying. That person's trying to trick us or influence us. We'll be learning about a handful of things that are helpful. One thing we'll be learning about, fallacies. Some of you, if you've heard about critical thinking or logic before, might have heard of fallacies. Fallacies are basically bad arguments. Arguments that do not succeed at providing good evidence to back up their claim. But their fallacies are often bad arguments that many of us mistakenly think are good arguments. And you know what one of the better tools, the rhetoric, is? A fallacy. If you don't have a good argument at your disposal, but you still want to try to persuade somebody, what you can do is put forward a fallacy. Put forward a bad argument, but where oftentimes people don't realize your argument is bad, and they might actually be tricked into thinking it's a good argument. That's how you can trick and persuade people, using fallacies. We're also going to be doing a lot of psychology in this class. A good chunk of this class is a cognitive psychology course on cognitive biases. And we're going to be learning about the biases in our minds that prevent us from reasoning perfectly and wind up making us susceptible to these fallacies, making us susceptible to tricks of rhetoric, to these manipulations. So that's a lot of what we'll be doing in this class. The one way of sort of boiling this down into its essence here is to be thinking about this as a matter of trust. Who out there is trustworthy, putting forward good arguments that winds up being good evidence? Who out there might be providing more tricks, manipulation, persuasive rhetoric with sort of not strong evidence at their disposal? All right, so there's one big skill we'll be trying to take out in this particular class. Another one we're going to be learning about is just getting better at reasoning. So we'll not only be looking at detecting the evil in the world, we'll be trying to buff up our ability to be good at reasoning, to be good at searching for truth and understanding. We're going to try to learn what I think of as the best methods, what basically most people who have tried to think through, it's not just me, but most people who have tried to figure out what are good reasoning methods, we're going to try to learn the best methods for evaluating any new information that comes to us. Is this new claim that we haven't thought of before true or false? We're going to learn good techniques for distinguishing true claims from false claims. We're going to be learning important methods for understanding complex issues. When we're first faced with a question that we don't know how to answer, how do we actually go through a step-by-step process of trying to generate successful answers and distinguish the correct answer from a variety of plausible but ultimately incorrect answers? This is the skill of inquiry. Inquiry is just a fancy word for questioning and coming up with answers to questions. Inquiring, going out and trying to figure out the answers to questions that haunt you. We'll be trying to get better at that skill. And we'll be trying to get better at the skill of decision making. One of the subgenres within logic is decision theory, or just decision making in general. How can you figure out how to make an effective decision? All of these skills, I think, are best accomplished through rational arguments. Arguments where the goal is the truth and understanding at heart. And here's where some of you might be a little bit more skeptical. I want to just think for now, for maybe, I don't know, a couple minutes about what the alternatives might be for each one of these. So like, one way to go about making hard decisions is a classic rational argument challenge, where you say, list all the possible choices you have and look at the strongest arguments for making each one of those choices, and then figure out which one of those arguments is the strongest argument so that you make the choice with the strongest argument backing it. That's one method, and I think somebody from the perspective of this critical thinking class would refer to that as the best method. Well, what might be another method that you could do? And I want to hear from all of y'all. How else could you go about making decisions? What else could you do aside from considering the arguments for all your choices and choosing the choice with the strongest argument behind it? What else could you do instead? And feel free to write in the chat or raise your hand and I'll call on you. One way you could do as a really obvious bad method is just flip a coin every time you have to make a choice. Does flipping a coin seem to work better? It's not obvious. Lamar, your hand is up. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, so I found that one thing that works that helps me, I guess, make some of these decisions or evaluate information and stuff is to have somebody literally play the role of devil's advocate in a way and just counter some of the things that I might present to them, not in a way to where, like it's completely irrational, but things, that are opposite of what I believe.
So you cut off at the very end there, but I think we got most of what you were saying, and I really agree with that. So when I think of trying to come up with the best argument for every single decision, I also think a really important thing to do is to challenge every one of your arguments to make sure they're actually strong arguments. And that devil's advocate approach, where you ask somebody else to be the one challenging all of your possibilities, is really a part of this rational process. This is something we'll be learning in this class a lot. This is a process I refer to as the dialectical process, and we'll be learning about dialectical reasoning in here. I think what you just said, Lamar, is wonderful, and it fits with exactly what we'll be doing in this class. So I'm glad that that's a method you already employ. Do you have particular people in your life who you go to as your devil's advocates? Or devil's advocate? What? Yeah, I don't know how you pluralize that. But yeah, are there specific
Absolutely.
people you go to?
Yeah, I have a friend who loves to do it.
Nice. That's awesome. It's good to have somebody like that in your life. Corey also mentioned something by comparing things side by side, either visually or comparing pros and cons next to each other. Yeah, so one thing I mentioned about the subfield of logic for decisions is that it's called decision theory. And decision theory uses what's essentially a pros and cons list, like you're talking about here. And they literally will visualize it in terms of a table. So they'll talk about decision tables, and they'll set up all the possible choices you have and all the possible good things that could happen and possible bad things, and then chart it in terms of like each quadrant, each particular possibility. And they'll literally set up this visualization in exactly the way that you're talking about, Corey. There are incredibly great methods for figuring this sort of stuff out. So that's wonderful. That's another great way. So what both Lamar and Corey are saying are fitting with what we'll be learning in this class towards making decisions. Let's go towards this idea of understanding complex issues. So how do you want to understand the world? If you've got a really tough question that's facing you, how do you go about trying to even begin the process of answering that question, of getting a better understanding of that issue? If you're faced with, for the first time in your life, some brand new problem, some brand new hard to figure out issue, how do you even begin that? And to me, there's a process of rational argumentation that I think is the best method for there. We're going to refer to this as abductive reasoning later on this semester. It's the sort of reasoning that scientists use. It's the sort of reasoning that detectives use when they're trying to solve a case. It's the sort of reasoning I encourage all of you to use when you're faced with any sort of tough life choice, like what do you want to do once you're done college? Or what do you think you want to do with your particular career goals? Or just about any sort of important type of complex issue you're facing. And like another sort of thing you could maybe do is trust experts, right? That's sort of like the flip a coin version from before here. Like maybe you could just like trust other people, but sometimes for these it's about trusting yourself. And I do think, by the way, sometimes it is about trusting experts. But one of the things we can do is learn when it's okay to trust experts and when it's not okay to trust experts. All right, and last bit is just about evaluating new information. If somebody comes along and says, here's a fact, how do you figure out whether what they're saying is actually true or what they're saying is false? How can we figure that out? Well, to me, again, it comes down to arguments. What is the argument for that new claim? Is that argument a successful argument with good evidence backing it up? Or is the argument lacking? Is it not that good an argument? And perhaps another method you could use, aside from looking at arguments, is just trust your gut. Just go with your instincts. But I don't think that's good a method. I don't think that's nearly as successful. There are a couple reasons for this. One reason is something that we read about last class. Your gut might be not the most reliable judge of stuff. When you're told a new fact, sometimes you just accept that new fact without questioning it at all. Sometimes you're just like, oh, cool, fun new fact. And you don't do any type of critical scrutiny. You don't think through whether the claim is plausible or implausible. You just accept it. And other times, your gut, metaphorically speaking, flips out, finds a new fact and is like, this has got to be wrong. I want to do everything in my power to disprove this claim. I want to actively try to shut down this and prevent this new information from entering my brain. I refuse to believe this. I will do anything in my power to shoot this down. This asymmetry is known as confirmation bias. And this is something that I want us to be on the lookout for. It's one of the many cognitive biases that makes up our gut reactions, our intuitive, instinctive, impulsive, first impression-based reactions to new information that comes our way. We should not be as trusting of that gut reaction as many of us might default to. And by the way, as a little side note, there are all sorts of places where trusting our gut is in fact even more reliable, is the reliable way to go. But you know how you figure out when it's appropriate to trust your gut and when it's not appropriate to trust your gut? Through reasoning, right? You can learn in this sort of class the sorts of scenarios when trusting your gut might be more reliable than trying to reason it out. And you can learn the times when reasoning it out is more reliable than trusting your gut. And that's one of the things we'll be doing in this particular class. And this gets to our final skill that I think we'll be developing in this class, and that's the skill of metacognition. We'll be thinking not just about how to answer very specific questions, but we're going to be thinking a lot about how we think in this class. That's what metacognition means. Meta means above. So cognition is about thinking. Metacognition is thinking about thinking, or learning about how to learn. So we're going to be thinking a lot about our own thought processes here. We're going to get very at ourselves at times in this sort of like awkward, abstract way. And we're going to learn techniques in this class for just how to be better at learning, for how to be better at figuring out the truth, understanding things, making decisions. That's a key bit of what goes on in this class. So before we move on to the next thing, where we'll be talking about intellectual dishonesty and intellectual honesty, now's the part of the class where I wanted to take a little bit of a break and talk about the group projects. So I'm going to switch back over to our Blackboard course page. If I can go back to it. I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom of the Unit 2 folder, where there's a discussion of the group project. So throughout the semester, I'm going to be asking you all to work on a group project. None of this project is due this unit. It's ultimately going to be due December 6th, so there's a lot of time for this. But what I want to do right now is introduce the group project and ask you all to do something that will determine which group you wind up being assigned to for the group project. So before I ask you to do the thing to form the groups, I'm going to click on this group project guideline right here, and we'll talk through this a little bit. So each group is going to be assigned a particular fallacy. And in this class, we're going to have groups of around 3 to 4 students, and you're going to create some type of new thing that can be shared online on a specific fallacy. I mentioned earlier very briefly what a fallacy is. A fallacy is a bad argument that many of us mistakenly think is good. It's like a tempting argument that many of us fall for, but it's ultimately bad. And so by what I mean is when I say create some type of new thing, is like a video or a Kahoot game or a work of art or a website or a slideshow or a handout, something that is about this fallacy your group is assigned to. You're making something new, not just finding stuff that already exists online. And the goal of whatever it is you make is to help teach your fallacy to the rest of the class. The rest of the class is also going to be reading about all of these fallacies your projects are on. We'll be learning about them throughout the units on these. But you, as a group, are going to be dubbed the experts on this fallacy. You'll be diving into that particular fallacy more than any other student in the class. And so when I'm thinking about teaching fallacy, thinking about maybe providing some sort of definition of the fallacy, maybe an explanation of it, some examples of arguments that commit the fallacy, explanations of why those are bad arguments, telling us exactly why the fallacy is bad as an argument, is mistaken reasoning. This assignment is ultimately going to be worth 100 points or 10% of your grade. Usually every group member receives the same grade because it's a group project. And this is an entire remote class, so I'm going to be asking you to meet virtually outside of this class to work on this throughout the semester. You can meet however it is you want, Google Meet, a shared Google document, an email thread, a text thread, whatever. As I mentioned, the project itself, whatever it is you create, is due to me by Sunday, December 6th. So here are all the fallacies, the 8 fallacies that each different group is going to be assigned to. What I want you to do is do a little bit of a ordering of each of these fallacies from the most interested you are in being in a group that devotes your project to that fallacy down to the least interesting. And this is where I'm going to ask you to take this poll that's at the very bottom here. I'm going to click on this poll right here. It's a place at poll and match. I'm also going to post this link in the chat right now, so you'll see it in the chat. You can click on that in the chat. And what I want you to do at this poll is put your name and your email address, and then just arrange these by clicking and dragging to whichever one is your favorite. Maybe you like appeal to ignorance the best. That's your top choice, so you put that at the top. Maybe you really don't like the ad hominem fallacy, so you put that one all the way down at the bottom. Maybe false dilemma is your second favorite choice, so you put that as your second one. Appeal to force maybe is your next one, you put that as your third one. Arrange all of these from your favorite at the top to your least favorite at the bottom, and then when you're done, click submit. That's what I'm asking you to do right now. We're going to devote just a couple minutes to you doing this. While we're doing this, I don't know, I'll just play a little bit of music. Anybody have any requests, feel free to let me know. I'll go back to Janelle Monáe for now.
The table about to turn. Yeah. I've been flipping through the timeline. Trying to get my ride. My city car. I got to cool down, but I'm under pressure. Get with my Crisco. Get with my Fisco. A renegade when I'm in.
So when you're done filling out the poll and match, just click yup on the little poll that popped up on Blackboard. So I know that you're done.
Liberation, elevation, education. America, you alive. But the whole world about to testify. I said the whole world about to testify. And the table's about to turn.
And if you're finished, I have a music request. I'm always looking for new music.
You fuck up the kitchen, then you should do this. Put it down, plantations. I'm talking, I don't need no validation. I like sage when I'm in a rage. I got my intuition. Hands dirty, mind clean. A different vision with a new dream. We kicking out the old regime. Liberation, elevation, education. I said America.
So far, according to the poll, about 10 of y'all have filled out the poll and match yet. About 15 of y'all haven't. Some Ari Lennox. I'm down for some Ari Lennox. Yes, Courtney, we're trying to do this poll that's on poll and match. Click on the link that's shared in the chat. And then arrange these from at the top, the one you most want to do, to the one you're least likely, you least want to do. Is Lucky Day the name of a group, or is that the name of a song? Where are you at, Ari? Lucky Day. I have not heard of Lucky Day. Yeah. I'm going to do some Ari Lennox first. Maureen Dancing. I don't know what that song of Maureen Dance is. I just do dance? I don't know the specific song, Rory and Dance, so now. But I play, is this Ari Lennox? Boys Will Be Bugs by Cavetown. That's another thing I have not heard of. And Amino, another group or artist I have not heard of. All right. I'm getting Lucky Days out. I'm going to put it on a little playlist. Oh, she changed the name of the song? All right, I'm at it. Boys Will Be Bugs. And then Amino. Is Amino the name of the song, Franco? I'm only getting songs named Amino. I'm not getting artists named Amino. Is it by Era? All right, I'll add it. All right, at this point, most of us have filled out the poll and match. We've still got 2 people who haven't filled it out completely yet. There's 3 people who haven't responded. But I'm going to move on to the next part of what we're doing. Please just keep finishing the poll and match while this happens. If you're not done yet. But let's go back to these slides. Let's now introduce the important term that you'll be writing your discussion post about. And that's the term of intellectual dishonesty. I guess it's a pair of terms because it's also in contrast with intellectual honesty. So you're probably familiar with the words honesty and dishonesty in everyday life. An honest person tells the truth. A dishonest person lies. So intellectual honesty and intellectual dishonesty is a subtle variation on that, where an intellectually dishonest person does not have to outright lie, but instead might say things that are true that try to get people to believe a lie. So there's this weird little separation between being actually dishonest, where you're saying lies, and being intellectually dishonest, where you're trying to, by saying true things, trick people into believing a lie. So in the intellectually honest side of things, this is the good things. You'll be using the tools of logic in the pursuit of the truth. The truth and understanding matters most as your primary goal. And the tools of logic, by the way, that just means arguments. You use arguments and evidence towards figuring out the truth. This class is all about pursuing arguments in the pursuit of truth. Arguments are a tool we use to figure out the world, to understand what's actually going on. That's an intellectually honest approach. Intellectually dishonest approaches, though, are using arguments for some sort of other different goal aside from the truth. And so sometimes it's about rhetoric and persuasion. Sometimes it's just about winning, right? You probably have been a part of some sort of debate with somebody where it was very clear they just wanted to win the debate. They wanted to win the fight. They cared less about what the actual correct answer was and more about winning, right? Sometimes people use the tools of logic just for seeming smart, to prove that, I don't know, they're better than the rest of us, or that they have some sort of value above and beyond others. All of those are intellectually dishonest goals in this sort of way. So the essential key nugget of intellectual honesty is caring about the truth above other things when you're using logic and arguments. Thinking about arguments as a tool toward the truth, not as a tool for anything else. And you can, as I've already mentioned, use arguments towards these evil rhetorical goals, toward goals of persuading people, tricking people, manipulating people. But an intellectually honest approach to using arguments is more about using them for the truth than anything else. It's more just about figuring out the world. So let's think a little bit about this right now. What are some, just to get a clearer sense of the difference between intellectual honesty and dishonesty, what are some jobs that are out there on the intellectually dishonest side of things versus jobs that are out there on the intellectually honest side of things? We'll start with the dishonest first. What are some intellectually dishonest jobs where it seems like the goal of that job is to persuade, is to win, is to seem smart? So Onel mentions politics as an interesting one. Oh, I'm intrigued by that one. I actually want to talk about politics as an interesting, tricky case later on in this. But I like what a lot of the rest of y'all are saying. Sales, right? What's the goal of sales? To persuade people to buy stuff. The primary goal of being a salesperson is to get people to buy things. Is the goal to get the truth out there? That goal is honestly secondary to making sure people buy what you're trying to sell them. So sales is absolutely a good example of a job that's defined in terms of intellectual dishonesty. Marketing and lawyers are two awesome additional examples of this. I want to do a little caveat right now just to make sure you understand what I'm saying here. When I am saying that these jobs are intellectually dishonest, I'm not saying that all people who work in jobs are intellectually dishonest. I don't want to say that every individual within these systems are immoral, are bad, are deceitful, dishonest, manipulators. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that the jobs that those people have taken in sales and in the legal system and in marketing are at their core focused on a goal that is not the truth above all else. Their goal seems to be something else aside from the truth. So I actually like it when a salesperson is refreshingly intellectually honest with me and says, you know what? I'm not going to try to trick you or manipulate you. That's a salesperson I actually want to return to and go back to. And there definitely are salespeople like that who don't treat their job in an intellectually dishonest way, even though the core of what they're supposed to be doing is manipulate in this sort of way. But anyway, with all those caveats aside, let's get negative about some of these other jobs y'all mentioned. So a lawyer, think about what a lawyer's job is. A lawyer's job is to win a court case. Whether that lawyer is on the prosecutor's side or the defendant's side, that lawyer is supposed to win the case, to get a guilty verdict if they're a prosecutor, or to get a not guilty verdict if they're a defense lawyer. And that particular thing about lawyering is intellectually dishonest. Lawyers will, in fact, learn some of the skills of evil rhetoric we were talking about earlier in this live session, right? A lawyer will learn how to convince the jury through manipulative tricks and techniques. A lawyer will use anything at their disposal to try to make it so that relevant evidence that is against their side is dismissed and not used in the case, right? There are all those sorts of techniques. Marketing is just sort of the broader side of sales. Any type of job where you're trying to present commercials for a product is obviously a one-sided job, where your goal is to persuade people to buy the product, to use the product. Your goal is not necessarily the truth. Investors, and there are definitely downright dishonest investors who provide Ponzi schemes, but you could even think of investing itself as the goal of getting people to buy into your investment program. So part of your goal might be, beyond just creating valuable investment or finding valuable investments, one of your goals might be convincing clients to join you. That's one of those tricky jobs where part of your job might be to try to find investments that are going to be financially valuable. And that part might be requiring some truth and understanding. But another part of your job where you're selling yourself as an investor is more manipulative and persuasive. I think a military and an intelligence agency might have winning, right, in this one-sided way as a goal, right? The military wants to win a battle, if it's a wartime at least. And it seems like the goal of a military during wartime is to win above all other costs. Multi-level marketing is another good example, Monique, sort of stemming from what Barbara was saying earlier. For sure, right? Think about all the tricks of multi-level marketing, right? There's scams, but people fall for these scams because they're manipulative in this sorts of way. They are often persuasive. Real estate is just another version of sales, right? Excellent example, Shantae. Real estate is just selling houses. And what a real estate agent does is try to persuade somebody to buy a house or other types of land or property. Beauty services, for sure, because sales is often wrapped up, Olivia, within those sorts of beauty services, right? A beauty service is going to want you to buy more of their products rather than less of their products. Cigarettes are often just promoted in this sort of way. Advertising and marketing and sales, I think, are all within this very nicely put, y'all. So these are the sorts of jobs I put on my slide, and there are some of the big ones that you mentioned in here. Law, advertising, sales, marketing, beauty services, real estate, all sort of stem from all of this as well. How about we go to the intellectually honest side of things? What are some jobs where it looks like the core thing that they're trying to do is figure out the truth, or what they are trying to do as the primary purpose of that job is to get to the truth? So yeah, this is an interesting one right now, because police in our society right now are under increased scrutiny for not being honest, right? There's a lot of, within the Black Lives Matter protesting, within movements towards defunding the police, towards saying that police are corrupt, that police are abusing their power. But at least within the definition of what a detective's job is to figure out the truth, right? What actually happened when you're at a crime scene? You want to try to figure out what happened. So yeah, I do think of police as part of that core intellectually honest thing. So I'm going to do the flip side of what I just did for intellectually dishonest jobs, and I'm going to do a caveat, right? I'm not saying all people within these intellectually dishonest jobs are themselves intellectually honest. Just like there are intellectually honest lawyers and intellectually honest salespeople who don't try to trick and manipulate, there are, on the flip side, bad people in these good jobs, right? There are definitely cops who are intellectually dishonest, who care more about like getting an arrest than figuring out who actually is the criminal responsible for the crime that they're trying to figure out. There are cops who put truth as a second, less important goal and put something else above it. So absolutely. Scientists, for sure, as Onel and Shantae are mentioning, what is a scientist's job? To try to answer scientific questions, to try to get the actual truth behind some sort of scientific phenomenon. Therapists, in part of what a therapist's job is, and I think this could go, if you expand to almost any type of doctor role, be it a mental health professional or a physical health professional. It seems like the job, first and foremost, is to diagnose what sort of health issues does my patient have? And that diagnosis is about getting to the truth, getting a real good understanding of what's going on. And then beyond that, therapists also have secondary goals of then trying to fix the problem, right? Of trying to help solve those issues. Same with doctors who are physicians, who are dealing with physical health. They will also then, beyond diagnosis, go and do something second as well. But the first step is that truth and understanding. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control's job is to research diseases, right? And disseminate accurate information about those diseases to the world. So yeah, absolutely. A historian is just like a scientist, but on the side of history, right? A historian is answering historical questions. They're trying to figure out what actually happened. How should we best understand this particular historical period? Research scientists, good job, Facundo, I like that one. Doctors, Olivia, as well. Even they try to get you to spend money on medication you may or may not need. So getting to my caveat, Olivia, as I mentioned before, there are individual doctors who might be intellectually dishonest, or there might be systems in place within many of these otherwise intellectually honest professions that are themselves intellectually dishonest. You might think of the for-profit pharmaceutical industry's influence on physicians and the mental health fields as being some sort of pull away from the pure intellectually honest goals of the health fields and towards other goals of maybe persuading people to just buy this pill, persuading people to buy this medication, whether or not it's effective. There are, at least in principle, supposed to be lots of checks and balances in place to prevent that from happening, to make sure that medication is effective before it's sold and offered by suggestion through prescriptions within doctors. But yeah, that is a legitimate worry for this. Anthropologist is a really good example as well. Anthropologist is like a mix of a scientist and a historian who studies a particular society and tries to gain a better understanding of what's actually going on in that society. Excellent, excellent example. So I think y'all hit on all the ones that I wanted to mention, like scientist, police officer. Y'all forgot about teacher in general. I think a teacher is a good example, not to toot my own horn as a teacher myself, but think about what the job of a teacher is. A teacher is supposed to teach the truth, right? A teacher is supposed to, at its heart, understand the truth first and foremost, and then disseminate that truth to others. I think a journalist might be another good example of this. And again, I bet many of you know some bad teachers who didn't care about the truth, who weren't intellectually honest. You might have come across some bad journalists who are intellectually dishonest journalists. But the goal of a journalist, the goal of a teacher, the purported goal of a scientist and a detective is to figure out the truth at the top. And now, I actually want to now go back to this politician thing, because I do think there's one sense in which a politician is definitely intellectually dishonest. But there's another sense in which a politician is at least supposed to be intellectually honest. Because I think there are just sort of two different I don't know. What would I call this? Like roles of a politician. And one sort of role is the politician trying, who is campaigning um, before an election. So that's one type of politician, right? And so Corey just mentioned this, right? The candidate campaign itself would be intellectually dishonest. So when you think about a politician campaigning, before that politician is ever actually elected, that seems to be an intellectually dishonest goal, right? What is intellectually dishonest about a political campaign, about a politician trying to win an election? What's so intellectually dishonest about what the politician is doing during that period? I'll call on Olivia, whose hand is raised. Go ahead.
I think just because uh, politicians, their goal is just to get you on their side, so it doesn't matter like what they're for, but it's most of what they're telling you, which might not be true.
Yeah, I really like this analysis, Olivia. That's well put. The goal is to win an election, right? What is that goal? Getting people to vote for me. That's a persuasion goal. That's a victory goal. That is putting persuasion above the truth. That seems to be the goal in that case. Win at all costs. And I think that's the first thing you have in mind when you think of a politician, right? A politician who's campaigning to win an election. Absolutely. But now Onel mentions here's a sort of switch. What about a politician after they've won an election and now have to lead, right? That's what a politician's job is. What is the goal of an elected politician? What is the job actually supposed to be once you've won the election? What are you supposed to do as a politician? What does a politician actually do when they're in office? What is their actual job supposed to accomplish? Onel says enact legislature, right? Try to make laws, try to understand the society that they have a leadership position in, right? And maybe veto laws, advocate on people's behalfs, right? So they're trying to figure out what are the issues in our society? How can I try to address the problems in our society to make them worse? How can I try to make society better? And part of that goal as a politician, once they're elected, should involve the truth and understanding. Whether they actually do that might be varying from politician to politician. But this is how I think of this. A pre-election politician is at its core doing the intellectually dishonest campaigning, trying to win. A post-election politician is kind of like a police officer or a scientist or a doctor, where they have to understand the problems they're trying to address before they can address those problems. So they're there. And as Olivia mentions, if they're already elected, they don't need to persuade anymore. Although one of the maybe problems of the American political system is that politicians are maybe required to win an election so often and then get reelected and then continue to get reelected if you're in those congressional positions, that they're constantly within the election cycle so that they never get a chance to be post-election, right? A senator who wins an election has to face another election 6 years later. A congressperson in the House of Representatives faces an election every 2 years, right? A president every 4 years, right? And then well put by Onel about how this depends, right? If their target, if there's a target out for them, so they need to have a strong foothold, right? If their opponents have that target out for them, for sure, right? So I think there is this interesting back and forth. But if you took elections out of the political realm, the job of a politician is to lead, is to try to organize the society in an effective way in some sort of manner. And that seems to be a noble goal. So awesome. Well put through all of this. Now I want to talk a little bit about BS. Y'all hopefully know what BS stands for. I'll say it just in case you don't. We're talking about bullshit right now. This is completely on the intellectually dishonest side. That's the only time I'll say it, but we're talking BS for the time being. BS is a special brand of intellectual dishonesty that is at its heart arguing for a claim with an indifference towards whether that claim is actually true or false. This is a special brand of intellectual dishonesty. Sometimes somebody who is into BSing says stuff that is actually true, where they do actually have access to the truth. Maybe they do correctly understand the issue they're talking about. But a BS artist, somebody who's good at this, doesn't really care whether what they're saying is true or what they're saying is false. What they care about more than anything else is making sure what they're saying is persuasive, making sure that they win the debate, whether what they have to say is actually true or doesn't matter. If what they're saying is false, they'll still say it. And this is a particular thing that I want us to be on the lookout for, because this is pervasive. There are lots of BS artists out there in the world. And also, I think if you're honest with yourself, I bet all of you have BS'd at some point or other in your own life. There's been times in your life where maybe you've been in a fight with somebody and you thought, what matters most is that I win this fight, not that I actually figure out the truth. And so maybe what you start to do is BS. Maybe you start just to say things that will help you win the fight, where you don't care whether what you're saying is true or false anymore. You're just going to say things that will hopefully win your side. If anyone has examples of that in your own life, feel free to share them now. You can raise your hand and we'll hear from you, or you can write out your examples in the chat. Here's another classic example of BSing that I think is particularly popular for those of us who are students here. Because I know, I'll admit to this, I have done this in my own life. Have you ever been given an assignment to write like a 1,000 word paper, a 4-page paper, and you write in your paper and you get to like the 3rd page and you're kind of done writing. You're at 700 words and you're like, I don't know, I've written all that I can on this. But you still know you have to write at least 1,000 words, so you got 300 words left. Well, what do you all do when you're stuck at that moment? If you're anything like me, you probably start to BS. You probably start to just write stuff to fill out the space, where you don't care whether what you're writing is true anymore. You don't care whether what you're writing is actually towards a helpful paper or not. What you care about is writing enough so that you get the grade, right? Your goal is now getting towards the grade. Your goal is not saying true stuff anymore. Barbara says she'll literally repeat stuff she said, but in another way, right? So like, I know, and I've had to read lots of papers like this on the teaching end of things, right? Where it's just like, well, in conclusion, this was a really tricky issue. And I'm glad that I was given the opportunity to think about this. And I'm really excited that I got a chance to do some research on this to figure this out. I suppose only time will tell whether this one answer is the right answer or this other answer is the one. But as you can see from what I've written before, I've already written this one side. So I'm going to be saying this side seems to make the most sense. And oh, by the way, oh, I've hit my 1,000 words, I'm done. Great, bye. Right? That's how lots of papers end, with just that BS fluff at the end of it. That's just BS. And that's something I want us to be consistently fighting in this class. We should not be bullshitting in here. We should be caring about the truth above and beyond everything else. All right, so I do have some more slides on this, and I said that one of the things we were going to talk about is intellectual humility this week. I think what I'd like to do is end our live session for today. A reminder that one of the things, the only thing you had to read for class this week is about intellectual humility in particular. So we'll start off next week's live session talking about intellectual humility and some other stuff. We're also going to be talking about straw figuring, and we'll be talking about steel manning or steel figuring, and we'll be talking even more later about open-mindedness. So we'll get to all of this later on for sure. But for now, be sure to do a few things. Read the intellectual humility reading if you haven't already, and be sure between today and Saturday, if I can switch over to our Blackboard course page, between now and Saturday, post in your initial post in the discussion board. And then between now and Wednesday, post your 2 replies in that discussion board and write out your rational life plan and submit that by Wednesday. That's everything you have to do for class this week. Everything due Saturday and Wednesday. Saturday, your initial post's due. Wednesday, all the other stuff is due. I'll stick around for the next 5 minutes if anybody has something y'all want to say, if you want to talk to me about something. But otherwise, I will see you all. Can I get this on? Where are we going to do? I'm going to play a little Boys Will Be Bugs. I will see you all next Friday. Have a good one. Yeah, no, I'm going to assign you all into groups and tell you what those groups are at next Friday's live session. So, see you all. Have a good weekend.